Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show on this Monday night, the 23rd of September 2019. And it's going to start off with a bit of a rant. I wasn't planning it this way, but you're going to love this. And it's mind-boggling. Let me just fill you in on a couple of things. So, I got a message on Facebook from Facebook saying that my account may have been hacked into and that I should change my password, which I did. And they asked me if these posts that were up were mine, and they were. No one hacked into my account, but changing the password wouldn't cause a big problem. Either way, it's always good to do that. So after I was done with that, I went to put up one of my weather posts, which I have been doing pretty much on and off, not on and off, but I haven't missed a single day in the last almost 5 years. I was restricted by Facebook once again for violating their quote-unquote community standards. Of course, you could appeal it. It's a 7-day suspension. I can post, but I can't share any links or at all. So I can't post stuff on my from my website. I can't post a YouTube link of my live stream. And I can't post links to Patreon, my subscription platform, and on it goes. And I've really kind of had enough. This is the 5th time in the last year. The first time this happened to me was when they took away all of my publishing tools back last August, coincidentally on the same day that Facebook went in and deleted a whole bunch of far right-wing accounts. Now, as you know, as those of you who are here on a nightly basis, I am not political. I certainly don't get political, or maybe slightly, but on the whole, we spend our time here on this channel doing weather and trying to solve the issues of weather forecasting. We don't talk about the other issues, the ones that are directly related to that, like climate change, or ones that certainly are not related to that, like when all the conspiracy theorists jump on board. So this really just finally was the last straw for me. That was one where I had no clue as to why they did what they did. They didn't ban me on that same day, but they did take away a number of publishing tools that people like me use on Facebook in order to earn a living, like everybody else tries to do. So as mysteriously as after 3 weeks on that first incident, after 3 weeks of just trying to find out why, which I never did, I just finally just threw my hands up and just couldn't be bothered. And then mysteriously in December, everything came back as if nothing had happened. Then there was just recently there was an incident where I just woke one morning. I was told that they took away, they wouldn't put ads on my Facebook videos, and I couldn't use the publishing tool because I violated community standards. Again, I don't know why. I've had posts pulled because I used the word threat, as in severe weather threat. So I learned that I can't say the word threat. I use the word risk now because apparently that word triggers off some bots, and by the time you get to a human person, it can be days. So I just, I changed the word and it worked. But this one today just takes the cake for me. I'm posting on pages where I'm authorized to post. I don't know if it's because of what they refer to as oversharing, but I'm posting on pages where the admins of those pages have actually told me, we want you to post your weather stuff here, okay? And there are a number of pages of which I'm already an admin on, so that it makes posting for me a lot easier. Well, can't do it anymore. So the thing is, I can't do this from day to day and deal with that nonsense. So I am just going to. This obviously has no, as far as the YouTube channel is concerned, this is only good for you because that just means I'm going to spend more and more of my time here. I'm going to spend less and less of my time on Facebook from here on in. Weather posts are going to be less, unless they can explain to me what in the name of God is going on, or can I even say God? I don't know. But I'll be using that platform far less, and I will be, of course, here. I have my Patreon platform, my subscription platform, and as far as the day-to-day stuff goes, if you're on the app, you've got no problem at all. So I just want to say right off the bat, if you do have the weather app, the iPhone upgrade finally went through this weekend. So make sure that you have the latest version and download the updates for both the Google, the Android version, and the iPhone version. The update will, when you go to your local forecast page, no matter where you are in the U.S., it will default to your location. As long as you give it permissions to do that, it will default to your location. The local forecast will default to your location. My posts will all still be there. You'll get notifications when those posts come out, and you'll have weather stuff that way. Of course, the YouTube channel. There's no change here, obviously. This just will go on. And if you are interested in being more weather intensive, you're going to have to jump onto my Patreon platform, because I have no desire to waste my time on a platform where the people who are behind it really go out of their way to make things extremely difficult for someone who's just trying to, eat and enjoy themselves in their lives and do what they have to do. We all can relate to that. Okay, so that's the end of my rant. The platform, the Facebook platform, is not a place that I want to be, nor do I think that most people that are trying to do what I'm doing should probably shy away from that, because you're just going to get yourself aggravated and into trouble. All right, that's enough of my rant. Thanks very much for putting up with me. I appreciate it. And right off the bat, let me just say thank you to Johnny Quest and Scott Briller, two regulars here virtually every night, hitting Super Chat. And I really appreciate it. And a big hello to everybody that is on board tonight. Glad to see that you're all here. And let's get going, because we have a lot of stuff going on that I want to get into. So first off, obviously, we have 3 named systems, 2 tropical storms, and Karen, which is now a tropical depression. And I have to laugh, because I spent the whole weekend wondering what was all this about. I saw this on Twitter and in a few people's posts saying Tropical Storm Karen is formed. Someone call the manager, and all these other things. And then I finally looked it up in the Urban Dictionary, and I was not aware that the name Karen is used to describe people who, it's specifically it's used to describe a woman who is perhaps in her 50s with a short hair bob and is known to be difficult and will go into stores asking directly for the manager. I don't know who came up with this stuff. I don't know who comes up with any of this stuff, but I thought it was quite funny. And now I understand where all that is coming from. Well, of all the tropical systems that are out there, Karen is the one that looks the worst here in terms of its satellite presentation. And I've got the tight loop here of the floater. And I want you to look at this and then remember that earlier today this was still being classified as a tropical storm. And when we show you Tropical Storm Lorenzo with top winds of 45 miles an hour, you're going to see a huge difference. Now, when you look at this loop, you're going to notice a couple of things right off the bat that are just not working right as far as development is concerned. First off, you've got clouds blowing off going from west to east at some levels. You have clouds blowing off from northeast to southwest over the islands of the over the Leeward and Windward Islands. And then, of course, you've got the very broad low-level center with this, which is actually up north of 15 degrees north. It's close to 16 degrees north, so it's basically sitting outside all this convection that is going on. So clearly the upper air winds are not working here. And take a look at those upper air winds. Go straight north from there and go north of the northernmost leeward islands. You see those clouds up there? They're going north to south. So that's telling you that the whole upper air is, in a two-word phrase, messed up. And a lot of that has to do with the what's going on with Tropical Storm Jerry, which is 900 or so miles up to the north. And we'll show you on the map how that all works out. So that is Karen. We're going to come back to Karen in a moment. I also would like to point out, with everything going on on the East Coast, that on the wider U.S. satellite view tonight, you've got a cold front coming through, and you would think with all these clouds that somebody's getting hammered with showers and storms, when in fact there is some activity going on in parts of upstate New York that will probably survive its way into New England, but the southern part of this front has very little happening. You've got Tropical Storm Jerry that's sitting about 350 or so miles south-southwest of Bermuda. That area in between, running back from the west side of Jerry all the way to the coast, there's a lot of mid-level and upper-level dry air that's there, and this is all pretty much working against a cold front coming into an air mass where temperatures today hit 90 and dew points were in the upper 60s in a lot of spots. You would think that there would be widespread thunderstorm activity, but there just isn't. It's so bone dry everywhere, in my area at least, where nothing's working from the standpoint of even getting a drop of rain. So I've been saying how when you go from one season to another, as we just did. Today's the first day of autumn, so we went from summer to autumn. You don't just flip a switch, okay? You don't suddenly have leaves falling and cool temperatures and chilly nights and you're out there with a jacket. Seasons bleed into each other. We saw last week how autumn actually bled into the last days of summer, and now over the weekend, but particularly yesterday and today, with temperatures that climbed well up into the 80s yesterday, and we saw some readings across New Jersey. Many areas got to 90, and even in parts of the Hudson Valley got to 90. You're seeing today, summer is bleeding in, at least for the first day of autumn. Now, we're going to see some cooler temperatures going forward over the next couple of days, and a couple of more weak cold fronts that we're going to be dealing with. But the other running theme, and this to me actually kind of suggests that at least from this respect, the switch was flipped sometime at the end of August, because it's been really bone dry. And over the next 7 days, by virtue of the Weather Prediction Center, WPC, on their 7-day rainfall forecast map, you can see that much of the eastern part of the United States, especially parts of the southeast down into Florida and even backing into Alabama, Mississippi, and parts of Louisiana, forecasting no rain over the next 7 days. And rainfall amounts running up the northern mid-Atlantic up to southern New England, looking at anywhere from 1/100 of an inch to under, at most, 1/4 of an inch in some spots. You start to see some higher amounts in northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and in Maine. Maine actually does pretty well here with that little stripe of 2 inches or so. And then you've got this band of this area of rain in the plains on up into the Great Lakes, where you've got this stripe of 2 to 3 inches, and then some scattered heavier rains right across the Canadian border from Lake Superior all the way back west into Montana. Rains up and down the Rockies, or at least from the mountains west, because if you're east of the mountains, it looks pretty dry in eastern Colorado and then back into parts of western Nebraska and western Kansas. And on the west coast, the northwest, up in Washington and into parts of northwest Oregon getting some rains, but then those rains do tail off considerably, and you go into California, we've got a large part of the state not getting a drop of rain at all. So this is a very, September, at least in my neck of the woods, and for a lot of areas in the northern mid-Atlantic to southern New England, is a pretty dry time of year. And it definitely is playing according to form, and I really don't see anything in the short or medium range that changes that. Now, at some point it will. Nothing ever lasts forever. We get these stretches, and And actually, the fact that it's happening at the time it's supposed to happen, September, October, at least through the middle part of October, is usually very dry. So we're just playing to form, really, when it comes to all of that. All right, so let's go back to the tropics now and take a look at what's happening. Now, we do have, by the way, tropical storm warnings are up still for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands because of the fact that even though they've downgraded Karen to a depression, it's not going to take too much if it were to just kind of, get its act together for a few hours, that you could push some winds up to 35 or maybe 40 knots. I think it's a stretch, but the rain is going to be the bigger deal here as the feature does move northward. So at least for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, there will be substantial rain out of this. But here we have on the loop, you can see Jerry, certainly, east of Florida and just southwest of Bermuda. Jerry has its own issues, and that is an exposed circulation, which you can kind of see on this very wide shot if you look close, but I'll bring up a tighter one and you'll be able to see it better. Look at Lorenzo off the African coast. Now, this was something that models have telegraphed for days and days now. It was going to come off the African coast south of the Cabo Verde Islands and almost immediately develop into a tropical storm. And look at the difference in terms of the banding that you see. There's a solid core that's developing near where there's a circulation center. I mean, that is really very impressive. And I think this is going to wind up developing into a major hurricane before it's all said and done. And in the meantime, you can see here, Karen really doesn't look like very much of anything here. It looks more like an open wave than anything else. And the Hurricane Center did mention some disturbed weather with a trough that's in the coming out of the Northwest Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico and going in the Southwest Gulf, that something might develop there. And since we've had 2 tropical storms already form from upper air features that have eventually warmed, I wouldn't be, and the fact that pressures are on the low side in the Gulf, the southern Gulf of Mexico, it wouldn't shock me if something were to pop up and develop into a tropical depression or even a tropical storm before it's all said and done. All right, so here's a tighter view of Jerry. I'm going to try to get a little even closer than what you're seeing here. Hang on one moment. And so there you go. So while we're on the dayside part of this loop, and I'll add some frames here so we can go back a bit further. It'll give us a much better view of things, but you can actually see the low-level center coming out from underneath the convection in the brighter white cloud. See it there? It just comes right out, and then new convection does develop on the north and northwest side, and it sort of gets tucked back in underneath it. So it is obviously fighting a lot of shear. You're still getting from all of this. You are still dealing with a flow of westerly winds coming across the top of this that's shearing the thunderstorm tops away. The other thing that I want to point out is watch these clouds here. Right over here, that is the outflow high clouds. They are actually blowing from north to south and coming into the southeast Caribbean. So those strong winds are impacting Karen and causing it to look as awful as it does in terms of a satellite presentation here. The actual low center is somewhere up here where there's very little going on, and then you've got all the convection that is further to the west that's getting blown off. So look, don't be surprised if tomorrow morning or even at 11 o'clock tonight that you wind up seeing the Hurricane Center downgrading this to an open wave. And here's a tighter view, and you can see the shear here even better. It shows up really well. I'm gonna hang on. I'm just gonna make this a little smaller so you can get more of the frame in there. And you see those clouds there, the ones that are going north to south. That's that outflow from Jerry, and you're seeing more of those clouds. You see these thunderstorms that are forming northeast of the Leeward and Windward Islands, and those cloud tops are just being blown to the south. It's hard for me to even see unlike Jerry, where you actually could see that low-level swirl, it's very hard for me to even see where the low-level center is. It's somewhere. It's a very broad center, as discussed by the Hurricane Center. I mean, I really am having a tough time figuring out where it is. It looks very, it's hidden in there somewhere. I'd have to get something even tighter as far as a view is concerned. So, again, don't be shocked if you wind up seeing this thing go away. And here's Lorenzo by comparison. You'll notice the winds here are all behaving themselves. The upper air winds is hardly any shear at all that I can see. It's minimal, and that's allowing this low to really consolidate and organize. There's a core of convection near where the center is, and you can pick out the circulation pretty well. The convection's also ample on the west side, the northwest side, and you're seeing some blow up of storms, a solid blow up of storms in the southern half and even on the eastern half. So this thing looks like it really wants to develop as it moves to the west. It's passing well south of the Cabo Verde Islands, so there's no real issue here. So I just want to go over what the Hurricane Center is doing with all of these things. So starting with Karen, we have tropical storm warnings up for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. That continues. The Hurricane Center keeps this as a depression. And then, assuming that there's something left to this, and you have to ask yourself whether that's going to be the case, you will perhaps see this develop into a tropical storm once it goes north of Puerto Rico and onto the Atlantic side, because by then, Jerry will be moving away from Bermuda. The upper air wind shear should relax, and conditions will be more conducive, particularly when you get into Thursday and Friday. Now, the other thing that's going to be going on through all of this is that we are going to see an upper high that's going to be building off the southeast coast and extending out east to Bermuda and going back westward into the Gulf states. So everything would suggest, especially since it's not going to be a really well-developed system here at this point, that whatever is there should turn to the west. So it's going to be important to see whether we wind up having something tangible to work with when this system moves out north of the Puerto Rico, or is it just going to get ripped apart by the wind shear and then the terrain in Puerto Rico with the high elevations, that you wind up with some kind of open wave, and then it never really gets going when it gets onto the Atlantic side. Now, Jerry, we have tropical storm watches. There was a tropical storm watch up for Bermuda. I'm thinking that they still have a tropical storm watch up for Bermuda, yes. And Jerry forecast to come very close to Bermuda. There it is, the blue. They did go to a tropical storm warning. I stand corrected. A tropical storm warning up now for Bermuda. And you can see what Jerry is doing with a recurvature, slow movement. Looks like it's not going to impact Bermuda until Wednesday. Between the shear, the dry air out to the west, you wonder whether this thing may wind up getting torn apart and weakened some more over the next couple of days rather than holding its own. You have to put that in as part of the equation. And then it kind of takes it east, northeast, or even east, or even southeast toward the end. But the Hurricane Center does forecast this to weaken as it moves eastward. So Jerry's going to be out there, and the fact that you don't have if you had a well-developed system here, you probably would see it would have already seen it being picked up by the opening that's out there in the Atlantic. But because it's staying relatively weak, that low-level center is just basically able to fight those upper air winds in trying to steer it further to the north. And Lorenzo, which is not going to, I really think in the long haul, barring any shock or surprise with how the overall pattern is shaping up, Lorenzo is going to become a hurricane in the next day or two, and then start a recurvature toward the northwest before it even gets to 50 degrees west. And given that there's going to be a general weakness in the Atlantic, because remember, by late this week, you're going to have Jerry somewhere up there around 35 north or so there's going to be a trough sitting out in the middle of the Atlantic that's going to extend down from there down to 20 degrees north. That's going to pull this up through into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So I really don't see how this is all, that this is going to amount to anything. Now I've pulled up the upper air out in the Atlantic, and you can just to show you again. This was for this afternoon. I'll just move it up to 8 o'clock tonight, and there's your issue. So what we're looking at is that 200 millibar level. So we're up at about 30,000 feet here. And these narrow lines indicate where the highs and lows are at that level of the atmosphere. And the L, the actual surface low, is what is plotted. So, and the highs. So you see the surface highs and lows, and then you see the upper air where we can find the highs and lows by just looking at the wind flow. And this is giving you the wind shear average in the level from about 5,000 feet all the way up to 30,000 feet. And that darker orange and red, you're talking about winds in 40 to 50 knots. So the upper air winds are blowing like this over Jerry, and then they move down over Karen. Okay, there is light wind shear when you head up toward the Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. But remember, that's just a static shot for a given time frame. You also have a big upper high that is sitting over Lorenzo. So if you look at these upper air winds, you can actually see that there is an upper air anticyclone or high sitting over Lorenzo, creating a good outflow, a solid outflow pattern here. So the upper air conditions clearly far different in the eastern Atlantic than they are at the moment in the western Atlantic. So going forward, of course, once we go north of Puerto Rico with Karen, it gets into a better environment, and actually right in here it's sitting underneath an upper level high, a small one, but it's there. You also have an upper low that is north of Cuba, so there's a little bit of an outflow, a fair outflow pattern that's trying to set up once it gets north of the island of Puerto Rico. And of course, here's Lorenzo, just perfectly happy to be under its own personal upper high. And that is going to hold together. There's no real wind shear. It's got decent outflow going on. So Lorenzo is going to be able to strengthen and some more. And then the big question in the longer term is going to be, where do we go from here with regards to Karen and with Jerry? So let's bring up the upper air out in the Atlantic and see if we can figure that out. All right, so I just put to 84 hours. So let's go. We're going to look at the 18,000 foot level here. And of course, what's happening right now is you've got this trough moving off the east coast tonight with a cold front. This is the map for tomorrow afternoon. So here's Jerry, and we'll make a little J here so you know that's Jerry. Karen is somewhere in here, kind of lost somewhere in there. You can't really see any kind of identifiable feature. And here's Lorenzo, that is way out. Now, you've got this upper high here. You've got a little bit of an upper low right there. There's an upper low south of Greenland. You got a nice big upper low there in Canada. So here's your jet running like this. So Jerry's going to try to respond to this trough by turning to the northeast or east-northeast as we go through the next couple of days. And of course, Karen gets kind of pulled up behind Jerry as Jerry tries to move away. Over time, what happens as we head toward the end of the week, you'll notice that when we get to Friday, we've got this big upper high that's building now back over from the Gulf states out into the Atlantic to east of Bermuda. You've got an upper high west of the Canary Islands. The Azores are up here. These are the Canary Islands here. And here is Lorenzo. And here's your main belt of upper air westerlies across the Atlantic, right in this section in here, right in there. There's your weakness between the two upper highs. So Lorenzo is going to want to turn on the back edge of that high that's to the east and ahead of the other ridge that is well to its west. So that goes. So the question is, what do we have with respect to Karen? What is left that upper high in the east is going to only be getting stronger. So are we going to have a viable system left that's going to come into that building ridge and then turn to the west? Or will I have the arrows kind of west-northwest, or is it going to be more westerly and wind up in the Gulf of Mexico? That's a big question. We've had various model runs, like last night's European, take a full-fledged hurricane all the way across the Gulf, only to have today's run showing a minor system that you can barely find moving into the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, you've got the GFS, which kind of goes in either direction, but lately it's been just kind of disintegrating it. I think it just basically says that what's going on now is way too much for that system to handle overall, and that you just may not be left with anything to work with. You might not even have even a small low cloud circulation for something to develop on once it winds up going out into the Atlantic. The overall upper pattern in the east into this weekend coming up is a ridge building with an upper high in the Gulf states and a ridge building. But you'll notice that the southern edge of those westerlies out of Canada, not all that far away. So there's probably going to be some kind of frontal boundary that's going to attempt to make it through here on Saturday, maybe a bit of a backdoor front that's going to push southward down into Virginia for the second half of the weekend. And then going forward, that ridge in the east is going to hold for at least through the middle of next week, but you got all of this here. You get this big developing low south of Greenland. So that flow out of Canada is close by here. The ridge is not overpowering, or that overpowering anyway. And this Atlantic feature with strong westerlies up in the North Atlantic is something we should pay attention to. And gradually you do see shortwaves moving into the east, and gradually as we move into those first days of October, the southern edge of the jet stream does push down further south, so we should be getting shots of cooler air. We've got the models continuing to try to show troughing coming into the east in the longer term. It just never seems to get there until the end of the period. And of course, through subsequent runs, we do have developments of various tropical systems, of other tropical systems of one kind or another. So I guess the bottom line in terms of the overall pattern is we're just kind of moving along the way we have been. There's no major change. You get these minor changes, temporary blips, the way the ridge builds or gets suppressed, and that of course winds up having impact in one form or another with regards to any of the tropical systems that are around. So I am going to let's take out the U.S. Let's look at the U.S. because we need to get the snow lovers all worked up here in a frenzy. So here's our surface map, and of course tonight we're seeing this cold front that's coming through in the east. You've got this next week high. You've got Jerry over here. A little bit of action with some moisture down in parts of the southwest, but a large part of the U.S. Remains bone dry. And going forward, of course, that front goes by. Here comes the next one, and it looks like it might bring some thunderstorm activity and some showers up into the northern plains and western lakes. When we get to Wednesday, Thursday, that front reaches the east coast, and you can see it here, but there's not much with it. And then, of course, you've got another low coming out of the plains, and you're seeing some light precip that's scattered up from the Pacific Northwest, and there's a little bit of snow there on the Canadian side. Well, moving forward, that low races to the Great Lakes, and now we go into next weekend, and as we go into Saturday and into early Sunday, right in here, there's a bit of a backdoor front that comes through, and you can see higher pressures are kind of trying to push across the Great Lakes and into eastern Canada, and then lo and behold, you've got this area of snow up for the northern Rockies with a low developing down in Utah. So you're seeing some energy coming into the west here as we head toward the last days of the month, and that low runs up to the plains. And now, of course, at this stage, you do have something that I think is Karen here, a weak low or a depression maybe going into the Bahamas, but it really doesn't do very much with it. And then gradually, you start to see some frontal passages happening in the eastern part of the United States as we get through the first week of October. and there's your little fantasy tropical storm or hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico during that first weekend. As always, for those of you who are new, we don't really put very little value in anything that the model does with respect to tropical storms after day 5, and we certainly, when it comes to snowstorms, we pretty much ignore all the fantasy snowstorms that the models wind up making in the longer term when we get to the winter time. I think we could take a peek at the, just again to salivate the glands ever so slightly. We will look at the snowfall over the next couple of weeks. The next couple of weeks, and you can see the snowfall over North America. Making steady advances in western Canada and up in northwest Canada, a little bit to the northeast, and even getting some snows down through the northern Rockies. And of course, you're seeing snows building up in Alaska. And since we're going to be at some point looking at Siberian snow cover, which again is something that I would suggest that you take with a grain of salt. One of the things about weather in the endless search of the magic bullet with regards to forecasting of any kind, but especially when it comes to winter forecasting, because everybody's so darn obsessed by it, is that once you figure out something that works, as far as giving you an indicator of future long-range outcomes, once you figure out something that looks like it's working, and it works for a whole bunch of years, the minute you start to use it is the minute where it no longer works anymore. I just want you to bear that in mind, because this indicator of Siberian snow cover, and for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it basically, I'm just going to give you a real simplified view. This is something that Dr. Judah Cohen, who we've had on our show a few times, is very big into the research of this. But the premise is that rapid snow cover growth in October in Siberia, particularly the western and southern flanks of all of this, is a precursor to the kind of winters that happen in the eastern United States. And the connection is that if you have that rapid snow growth going on in October, that the chances of a colder and snowier winter in the east are pretty good, or pretty solid. The problem is that the last couple of years, the last 3 years or so, once everybody got kind of obsessed by this, over the last 3 winters, the indicator has not worked very well. 2 years where we had off-the-wall snow cover growth, and the snowfall was, it would depend on where you look to try to get to make a comparison. It worked for some areas. Actually, for the last 3 winters, I think it's pretty fair to say that the snow cover growth worked for some areas, but worked well for some areas in the eastern half of the United States, and worked poorly in other areas. So again, it's a magic bullet. I show it because I like to look at it. I know you guys like to look at it, and it does give us something to talk about. But it is definitely not something that we put any kind of strong feeling with regards to where it's going. Doug Crum, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really appreciate it greatly. Thank you. So you pretty much got the view here with respect to what my thinking is. So a few of you that might be watching for the first time, and I saw a couple of comments from some of the weekend videos, which I haven't gotten to, asking me about the long range in the winter. So let me just state for the umpteenth time that I don't do long range forecasting. I've never been able to get my head around it. There are some people who do it, and they can wrap their heads around all the technicals that are involved. It's just not my thing, and I'm not really interested. I kind of look at it. I'm a snow lover at heart, and I'm a snow weenie at heart. But when it comes to my forecasting, I just, I do it. I shut all that stuff, all that emotional, fun stuff out, and just look at things and figure out what's going to happen and go from there. Now, what we should look at, I just want to look at really fast, is I didn't get a chance to pull it up when I was set. I would have had to had I not been dealing with all this anger that I have today with Facebook. But let's just bring the radar back up, because we do have some action going on at the moment. Where did you go? Here we go. There we go. So there's the radar across the northeast. And actually, you have some hefty showers and a few embedded thunderstorms moving up through upstate New York, north of I-90, and heading into Vermont and eventually into New Hampshire. But you see how the southern end of this just really fell apart. You got some scattered cells moving across central Pennsylvania. Maybe some of that holds together in the next few hours as it moves eastward. But on the whole, there really isn't a whole lot happening. And with respect to rainfall this week, you know what? That's something I could also bring up, was like just as a comparison. Let's just go back to tropicaltidbits.com, which of course thanks to Levi Cowan for providing this absolutely awesome site to pull up all these weather models and have them in one easy place to look at. So here's our rainfall forecast for the next, let's go the next 7 days. And you can see at the GFS at least, you've got those patches kind of the way WPC has them, but you can also see those large dry patches that show up. And then over the next 2 weeks, you start to, the model does try to make the pattern a bit wetter during the second half of that forecast period, especially the last 4 or 5 days of it. So you suddenly have a bit of a blossoming of rain in areas that were predominantly dry in the first half. But I would just kind of be I would be suspect. The WPC 7-day map usually works fairly well. It's not perfect, but at least it gives you an indication of what the upper pattern is going to be like. And when you see something like this, like we showed earlier, okay, this tells you right here there's a ridge in the east. Upper high, sinking air, subsidence. You're going to have very little rain that you're going to be able to produce out of that. And this also tells you that you've got various shortwave troughs moving along in the flow out in the Rockies and over up into the western lakes and along the Canadian border. So there's a northern jet that's there, but the ridge is going to be tough to fight. All right, I'm on the chat board with my buddies here on my YouTube channel. If you're new to my YouTube channel, you can subscribe very easily. It's free. Just use your Gmail account, and if you do that, you will be able to jump in and comment on the chat board. And if you can't, you can always leave a comment afterward. William Uber, hometown where I live, you live, bushes, grass, and trees. I say watering and need. Oh my God, it's so bone dry. My lawn is gone. My backyard, which has a lot of trees and tends to, I tend to grow mushrooms very easily there because the water just, stands for long periods of time, has now gotten to the point where the mushrooms aren't even growing. So I know it's dry in my backyard when that is the case. Brandon Kasner, pattern changing. Well, I think maybe for the second week. It's certainly not for this week, but maybe for the latter part of the forecast period, we're going to start to see some chess pieces move around. This is what we're seeing is pretty typical of this time of year. So the atmosphere is just pretty much playing according to form. And so there's no big surprise here. Wetter except the southeast. Doug Crum, absolutely. That's just, it's kind of, at least that's how it looks through the first 7 to 10 days. Rosendo Benitez, welcome aboard to my YouTube channel. We can get the positive PNA, negative NAO, and EPO all at one time for several days. If. And that is the big question. Look, I'm going to tell you this. If you could have any of those three, if I told you you could only have one, Rosendo, which one would it be? Okay? Because if it was me, it's the EPO. If I had to have any of any of those, as far as snow and winter weather, give me the negative EPO, and I'll take my chances with the other two. If you give me a positive PNA with a negative EPO, I could care less what the NAO is. You could do pretty well with 2 out of 3. So that's my view. But I'll take the EPO, the East Pacific oscillation, pressure changes up in the Eastern Pacific versus the North Atlantic oscillation, pressure changes up in the North Atlantic. You want higher pressures up in the North Atlantic if you're a snow lover so that you'd have lower pressures and colder air in the east. But as for me, give me that East Pacific oscillation anytime, and I'll live with the other two, whatever it gets. I prefer the way, says Jacob, and welcome, the East Pacific Typhoon Forecast map over current NOAA maps. My general view is the East Pacific Typhoon. Japan knows the Western Pacific best because that's what they work with. And I will also point out that one of the things that the models have been doing in the last couple of weeks is they developed a lot of a few recurving typhoons that never really wound up happening. And I think that also impacted what the models were doing downstream across North America, responding to those recurving typhoons by trying to drop troughs in the east and bringing ridges up in the west. But those typhoons never really did occur, and what tropical systems did occur never really recurved. So you wind up where we're still pretty much in the same place. Chad Mabslayer, I respect Dr. Cohen, but his prognosis hasn't been great the last few years. Well, these things, as I said, the long range folks always you're always trying to find, all forecasting really, you're always trying to find that magic bullet where you can just say, I have A, or I have A and B, therefore, this C has to happen. That really doesn't exist. And if you think you find something, I guarantee you, as soon as you find it and as soon as everybody else discovers it, it stops working. It's just kind of how it is. I see some of you, including Chuck Cardillo and a few others, reminiscing over past hurricanes that have occurred up the East Coast. Usually, once you get into October, the frequency of tropical systems up the East Coast begins to diminish. That is not to say that it's impossible, because, of course, we saw Sandy at the end of the month, and there have been tropical storms that have impacted the eastern United States during the month of October. But the odds do start to go down because there's a general tendency for the upper air westerlies in the atmosphere to increase. So you're going to see a bigger chance that any tropical systems that do develop are going to recurve before they reach the East Coast. I mean, you almost always have to have a perfect upper air setup in order to bring a storm up the East Coast. Sandy was like that. Irene, any of the storms that move up the East Coast. If you look at the upper air, you would look at the upper air and say, of course it moved up the East Coast. And in the absence of those types of upper air setups, you spend the rest of the time looking at these tropical systems, kind of trying to figure out a way that they could come up the East Coast, when in reality, you can't move a storm northward up the East Coast if the winds along the East Coast are blowing from west to east. Can't happen. All right, so that's why I, through Dorian and from Puerto, a few folks were talking about those possibilities of those systems moving up, and the answer is no, not with the upper air that you have set. Weather and low, you want real fall in Norfolk, you're going to have to be a little more patient and wait to get into October. We got to rearrange this pattern here in the east for a bit first, and then we can start to bring those cooler air masses down further and further south. All right, folks, it's coming up at 7:51. Thanks for being here. Collective hello to everybody. If I didn't get to say hello to everyone directly, my apologies. I try to. I don't always succeed. So here's what we're going to be doing. Tomorrow, of course, in the morning, Weather in 5 will update everything that's going on. You can find my website posts at meteorologistjoechaffee.com, or even easier, just download my free weather app from Google Play or on the App Store for iPhones. And the updated version is out for both the Android and the iPhone, which will, on your local forecast page, it will default to your location, and you don't have to put it in each time. So that was a change that it was really important for me to put underway, and I was able to do that. And I also added a tab for Long Island, so when I write stuff for Long Island, which I don't get to do every day, you'll get a notification about it, and it'll post on the Long Island tab. And of course, notifications are on the app are there, so you'll get everything I post with. And for those of you who are real weather geeky, jump onto my Patreon platform, which is just $2 a month. But you get extra videos, you get extra posts. You can message me anytime, and I do respond, particularly if weather's important to you with regards to the stuff that you do day to day and you need more direct information. This might be a good place for you to be, especially come the winter time. It's $2 a month to start. Higher tiers there for those of you who require some hand holding. And the reality is that the app is free. I don't want to, I didn't want to go to a subscription. A subscription platform. I wanted to keep it free and leave it up to you. If you guys want to support it, you can do so by just joining Patreon at the $2 level. I think $2 a month covers it pretty well. You need a link for the App Store. I can do that. So hold on. Here we go. I'll put the links up for the App Store. For those of you who are on iPhones, you've got this is your link to the App Store. And for those of you who are on Android, you have Google Play. And here is the link to Google Play so that you can update your Android device. And there it is. Okay, and the Patreon link is up there as well. You've got your iPhone link, you've got your Google link, and I guess one more link before I say goodbye, and that is for those of you who shop on Amazon. There's an easy way that you can support what I'm doing, and it doesn't cost you one extra dime. You can use my link on Amazon, and Amazon will throw me back a little bit of coin out of their pocket so I can get a couple of cigars and a cup of coffee. We're a participant in the Amazon Services LLC Associates Program, which is an affiliate advertising program designed to provide a means for us to earn fees by linking to Amazon.com and its affiliated sites. So I would just do a little disclaimer there so we can be honest and straightforward about what we're doing here. Okay? Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for being here. I appreciate those of you who sat through my Facebook rant. I really hope that they've, when I've ranted before, they've resolved my problem pretty quickly. I wonder why. But let it be known, Facebook, that I plan to continue moving people away from your platform and to other areas where I don't have to deal with your nonsense. Okay? Have a great evening, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.